Welcome back, travelers, to a special episode of the Boss Watch, where we are going to be talking basically about the future. You see, recently during the Kamigawa block, or during the last Kamigawa set, we saw Tamiyo become completed, and it was super cool and really, really messed up. And that's how the story actually ended. That was the epilogue of the Kamigawa story. And instead of us putting that at the end of the last bit, the Dearest Friends, we wanted to focus on Kamigawa, and instead give an entire episode specifically about Phyrexia. Unfortunately, because of that, Joe is currently off on New Phyrexia searching to see where they're at as far as development goes and just how the Mirrans are doing. So he's not going to be here for this particular episode. Instead, I'm going to be going over 9 Planeswalkers that are at risk of being transformed by the Phyrexians. And each of them will have their own specific reasons that I'm about to get into. So we're going to start off with the 3 that are definitely going to become Phyrexians. The first 3 that I would say are like, there's no doubt about it. First one is, of course, Tibbles. Tibble, when during Kaldheim, we saw that he was seeded by Vorinclex, and because of how the time is set up, and we saw that Kaya didn't have her blade, lost her blades at that point, but looking back at Innistrad, she still had them. That makes it very likely that Kaldheim takes place at some point in the very, very near future. Most likely right after Kamigawa happened, because now they know how to do it. Because prior to this, the Phyrexian oil and the Planeswalker spark were incompatible, where if you had the oil infecting you, it would just snuff out your spark, and you just become a random drone, which, side note, means that we'll probably see Venser's appearance in some form, because we know that they can repurpose people, like Belb was an example of a person that started off as basically killed by Phyrexians. They took her flesh and they remade her in a new image with Phyrexian powers. Similar stuff happened to Urte, though he wasn't actually killed, he was just corrupted over time. So basically, it's likely we'll see a Venser creature, first of all. It'd be weird if they were able to figure out a way to give him back his spark, because then that would fill up the white-blue spot that we're going to talk about later. But looking at these 3, we have Tybalt, then we have Ashiok. Ashiok at the end of the Theros Beyond Death, which had basically no story. It had some story. It's covered essentially all in the new Capenna series. But other than that, Ashiok sees one of Elspeth's nightmares and is like, oh, cool, that looks terrifying. I'm going to go check that out. And so Ashiok actually just left and went straight to New Phyrexia. So it's very likely Ashiok will be transformed and they will become a Phyrexian Planeswalker. With blue-black Phyrexian powers of nightmares, that's going to be insane. I'm going to love that. But that's going to definitely happen there. Then we also have Grist. Now, Grist is basically a giant bug monster that was introduced in I believe it was Vintage Masters. It was one of those offshoot, not standard sets where you see a ton of Commander staple cards show up. And Grist's whole deal was that it's a bug Planeswalker. And it says in all modes, it's also a creature. So it's got a really weird mechanic, but the fact that it can actually be used as a vessel, you could say, for infection, for being a pest, I feel like that would be a great example of a green-black Phyrexian Planeswalker. It feels like it would already be a Phyrexian Planeswalker from the way it's set up. It just needs to be mechanized. Maybe the host creature itself needs to be transformed, and it'll cover be oil instead, or something along those lines, or just a bunch of infect bugs. But being able to just spew infect creatures at something, that sounds like a really great green-black Phyrexian Planeswalker. These next 3, well, the other ones were basically like, I'm sure that's going to happen. These next 3, I feel like it would make sense for them to have their storylines lead them to this spot. So the first one that I think is storyline-wise, one that really should happen, is Calyx. Calyx would be a great green-white Phyrexian Planeswalker, mainly because his whole deal is that he exists as he does, specifically to capture Elspeth and kill her and send her back to the underworld. So if Elspeth is just directly opposed to the Phyrexians, it would make sense for Calyx to see the Phyrexians as a powerful enough threat to Elspeth and join forces with them, willingly allowing himself to be completed. In addition, in that moment, it would transform him and make him view Elesh Norn as a god. So it would still fit with that whole idea, and it would just, I feel like it'd be a really weird and twisted way, especially if he just shows up. Like if we go to Dominaria and Elspeth is there, like, okay, we got to do this and this and this, the Phyrexians are coming, and then he shows up and he's already completed. Like if we just surprise Phyrexian bounty hunter, that would be really cool. I feel like that'd be a great way to reintroduce his character and give him a like actual like purpose beyond I need to catch Elspeth. He's not just Team Rocket anymore trying to get a Pikachu. He actually becomes a legitimate threat. And I feel like that would be a great way to boost up his character. Similarly, but in the completely opposite direction, we have Koth. Yes, I think Koth should be a red-white Phyrexian Planeswalker. The reason being, we already know that Urabrask, as a red Planeswalker, is able to resist the, I guess you could say, the urge to make everything complete. So if Urabrask basically reaches out to Koth at some point in the past and is like, hey, look, they're completing Planeswalkers, they're corrupting them. If you allow me to, I can complete you, and you'll still have your free will. And it would make sense for him to be red-white. We've already seen plenty of the whole idea of in the past, the Mirrans were firmly in the red-white camp, trying to stop everything. So if we saw a red-white Phyrexian Planeswalker, it would make the most sense for it to be Koth. I could see an argument for Huatli, because there was oil on Ixalan, but the oil is apparently just dinosaur oil because there's dinosaurs there, which is kind of disappointing, but it's more likely that Koth, I think, is going to get Phyrexianized and maintain his self, as opposed to the way Tamia was completely corrupted and her mind changed entirely. I think Koth will be able to stick around because his purpose essentially was destroy Phyrexia. So becoming Phyrexianized, he may hate himself and view himself kind of like Tongarth did after he was transformed, but I feel like that would be that. Then there's this third one, which I know is probably not going to happen, but I think it'd be really cool if Dovin Baan became a white-blue Phyrexian Planeswalker. Dovin is dead. He's very dead. But the way he died was, first of all, in that terrible Forsaken novel, and second of all, it felt like they just kind of smushed and just all over his actual, like, his development as a character, because he was very quickly becoming an actual villain and a very like formidable one. So what I was hoping would happen is we would get to see him with like mechanical eyes because his eyes were gouged out. And so the main thing I could see happening is that he was killed by a Dimir agent, Rat. And the Dimir are shown to be directly working with Tezzeret. And Tezzeret is working with the Phyrexians. So it's possible, with a lot of hand waving, that they took Dovin Baan's body as he was dying, gave it to Tez. Tez then took the body, and then he went and brought the body to Phyrexians, and Phyrexians were able to reverse engineer and keep him alive. Maybe in a stasis kind of thing until they can turn him into a full-on Phyrexian. And seeing him, and like maybe he has no eyes at all, like a Phyrexian normally would, and then he gets the additional Vidalcan arms. That would be really cool, I think, if we saw Dovin Baan in that look. Now, these last three, they're the ones that I would consider to be like the biggest stretch, mainly because they don't actually have a reason really to be there. It's just to fill out the rest of those colors. Because we've covered these dual color combinations. There's only 3 dual color combinations left because Tamiyo's already the blue-green one. And the first one is, and I mean, it's just a great example of why, I mean, they're like, I guess you could. Basri. Basri is basically Samut without the interesting backstory. All we know about Basri is that Oketra was his like patron deity, and then she died, and he picked up her one of her arrows, and it became his spear. And he basically, that's his whole deal. He fights for his friends, whoopity doopity. He basically has Samut's motivation but weaker, and then he has Teo's moveset but less interesting. So it doesn't really make any sense for him to exist. So what if they just made him so that they could show him later on as a Phyrexian? That instead of putting +1 counters on stuff, he puts -1 counters. It would be able to show his way his character has been twisted and transformed. Similarly, we have a character who is really interesting, but doesn't really have anywhere to go story-wise, which would be Saheeli. See, you could say Red-Blue could be Ral Zarek, because Ral has his own arc and everything going on, but he's still very important with Ravnica and doing things on Ravnica. And I feel like when it comes to a Red-Blue Planeswalker, Saheeli, she's cool. She has an interesting moveset and ability to recreate anything out of artifacts, but she doesn't really have any motivations She doesn't really have anything that's driving her in a specific direction story-wise. And so if they were to Phyrexianize her, it would make it to where, first of all, we lose a really cool character similar to how we lost Tamiyo, who is like intriguing to us, but it would also feel like they cut someone down in their prime. It would feel like there's now a super powerful ally to the Phyrexians that is able to craft essentially whatever they need to. And on a plane of metal, that would be overpowered. And then the last one is what I think would just be like, I guess you could say a dark horse pick for red-green, because there's several you could go with red-green. You could even say Koth red-green and go quietly for red-white. But I think Ramaz. You see, Ramaz was from one of the really, really old Duels of the Planeswalker series, and he was a minion of Bolas. And we never saw him come to fruition. He existed all that time and never really showed up afterwards. And Bolas is gone now. So the only person that really has a connection to him is Tezzeret. And of course, again, Tezzeret is working with the Phyrexians. So if someone was going to bring Ramaz, that would be the time, is right now. And just show up as a red-green planeswalker, red-green infected planeswalker. I think that'd be amazing. And with that, you would have a full 10 planeswalkers on this roster, which would mean that there's more Phyrexian planeswalkers than there are official members of the the Gatewatch. Obviously, more official members of the Boss Watch, but you get the idea of there's just this overwhelming mass, and it would spread across every color too. So you would have access to it across. It would just show the permeating effects. Obviously, you can go into monocolor planeswalkers, you can go into tricolor planeswalkers, but I feel like if they just stuck to a cycle across all these sets of dual color planeswalkers, that'd be really cool. And with that, I think that's going to be this episode. If you guys have anything specific that you guys think would be great, like a Phyrexian planeswalker that you have like a reason behind, then I don't like this guy, I think he should change. Let's just put it in the comments. I know that there's people who have said a Johnny. I feel like he has too many threads connected to him to have that really cut short. While Tamiyo may have seemed like a pretty big character, the fact that she was a non-interventionist meant that she was inherently not going to be a part of a lot of stories, just from the virtue of her character being the way it was. And the most interesting thing she could have done was be in Kamigawa and get completed at that point. So a Johnny, he's actually active, he's working through things. Karn is a staple to Fairy. All of them are like that. There is one, I could say, Jaya. I don't know what they're going to do with Jaya, but they could complete her. A really crazy move, and this is just right off the top of my head, like right now as we're closing this, is Chandra. Because if they complete Chandra, that's going to infuriate Nisa, Liliana, Ajani, and Jaya. And it would bring Jaya back to being the staple, like the main person on red. And you'd be able to change into Giorina's loading screen to have a Phyrexianized Chandra on it. It's not going to happen. She makes money for them. They're not going to do that. But it would be interesting. It would be cool. So with all that said, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Until then, travel well. Quick side note, I think that Ashiok could actually be the black-white planeswalker, because if Ashiok goes directly to Elish Norn, that would mean that Elish Norn would have access to her, and then that would leave it open for Tezzeret, who, despite being immune to the Phyrexian oil, could possibly become the blue-black Phyrexian planeswalker, specifically because he wants to become that, and he would willingly allow himself to transform. By the way, I think the thing that he wants is the ability to turn his entire body into metal, so he has complete control of it, because he's progressively getting less and less human as he goes along. So those are just some possible additions to the actual stuff we were just talking about. Also, Vivian could be the red-green planeswalker if she chooses to work with Urabrask. Yeah.